Hello, this is Krystal, and thank you for joining me for this week's First Chapter Friday. Today I will be reading from the beginning of Louis Bayard's The Pale Blue Eye. The Last Testament of Gus Lander, April 19th, 1831. In 2 or 3 hours, well, it's hard to tell. In 3 hours, surely. Or at the very outside, 4 hours. Within 4 hours, let us say, all be dead. I mention it because it puts things in a certain perspective. My fingers, for instance, have become interesting to me of late. Also, the lowermost slat in the Venetian blinds, a bit askew. And outside the window, a wisteria shoot, snapped off the main stem, waggling like a gallows. I never noticed that before. Something else, too, at this moment. The past comes on with all the force of the present. All the people who've peopled me, don't they come thronging round? What keeps them from bumping heads, I wonder? There's a Hudson Park alderman by the hearth. Next to him, my wife, in her apron, ladling ashes into the can. And who's watching her but my old Newfoundland retriever? Down the hall, my mother, who never set foot in this house, died before I reached the age of 12. She's ironing my Sunday suit. Curious thing about my visitors, none of them says a word to the others. Very strict etiquette in place. I can't work out the rules of it. Not everyone, I should say, minds the rules. For the past hour, I've been having my ear bent, torn, nearly, by a man named Claudius Foote. I arrested him 15 years ago for robbing the Rochester mail. A vast injustice. He had 3 witnesses who swore he was robbing the Baltimore mail at the time. He flew into a fine rage about it, escaped town on bail, came back 6 months later, crazy with cholera, and threw himself in front of a hackney cab. Talked all the way to death's door. Still talking now. Oh, it's a crowd, I can tell you. Depending on my mood, depending on the angle of the sun through the parlor window, I can attend to it or not. There are times, I admit, when I wish I had more traffic with the living, but they are harder to come by these days. Patsy never stops around anymore. Professor Papa is off measuring heads in Havana, and as for him, well, what is there to call him back? I can only summon him in my mind, and the moment I do, all the old talks play out again. That evening, for instance, we spent discussing the soul. I wasn't persuaded I had one. He was. It might have been amusing to hear him go on if he hadn't been in such terrible earnest. But then, no one had ever pressed me so strongly on this point, not even my own father, traveling Presbyterian, too busy with the souls of his flock to plant much of a boot on mine. Again and again, I said, well, you may be right. It just made him hotter. He'd tell me I was just putting off the question, pending empirical confirmation. And I would ask, in the absence of such confirmation, what more can I say than, you may be right? Round and round we went, until one day he said, Mr. Lander, there will come a time when your soul turns round and fronts you in the most empirical fashion possible. At the very moment it quits you, you will clutch for it, in vain. See it now, sprouting eagle wings, bound for the Asiatic Aries. Well, he was fanciful that way. Gaudy, if you must know. Myself, I've always preferred facts to metaphysics. Good, hard, homely facts. A full day's pottage. It is facts and inferences that will form the spine of this tale, as they formed the spine of my life. One night, a full year into my retirement, my daughter heard me talking in my sleep, came in to find me questioning a suspect 20 years dead. "The coroner won't square," I kept saying. "You do see that, Mr. Pierce." This particular fellow had cut up his wife's body and fed the pieces to a pack of watchdogs at a battery warehouse. In my dream, his eyes were pink with shame. He was very sorry for taking up my time. I remember telling him, "If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else." Well, it was that dream that made me see. A career won't be left behind. You may slip away into the Hudson Highlands. You may screen yourself behind books and ciphers and walking sticks. Your job will come and find you. I might have run a little farther into the wilderness. I might have done that. How I let myself be coaxed back, I can't honestly say. Though sometimes I believe it happened, all of it, so that we should find each other, he and I. But there's no point in speculating. I have a story to tell, lives to account for. And since those lives were, on many sides, closed to me, I made way where needed for other speakers, my young friend especially. He's the true spirit behind this history, and whenever I try to imagine who'll be the first to read it, he's the one who presents himself. His fingers tracing the rows and columns, his eyes picking out my scratches. Oh, I know, we can't choose who will read us. Nothing left, then, but to take comfort in the thought of the stranger, still unborn, for all I know, who will find these lines. To you, my reader, I dedicate this narrative. And so I become my own reader. For the last time, another log in the fire. Would you please, Alderman Hunt? And so it begins again. And if you would like to finish reading this book, The Pale Blue Eye, it is available on Libby. Please join me here next week as I read from the beginning of Nora Roberts'